What's the most entitled behavior you've seen from a passenger on an airline? Every so often we get the odd straggler who boards last, who finds a vacant seat in first or business, thinking that we won't know that they're from coach. "Excuse me, sir, I might need to see your boarding pass. Sorry, your seat is 58A, not 1A. But I'm so tall, I need the legroom." Awkward silence. I saw this being given as advice on Twitter recently. This freelance guy who travels a lot decided to share his pro tips for long flights. A lot of it was just about seat posture and stretching and such, but then one tip was to always be the last person on the plane so you have your choice of open seat. Yeah, no, that's a great way to have nowhere for your bags and still get the same seat you were assigned. My girlfriend's mum is a flight attendant. One time, a woman got quite angry because her daughter spilled apple juice all over and there was not a clothes dryer on the plane for her daughter's sweater. Not an attendant, but was on a flight with really bad turbulence. It went on for about 10 minutes, then the old lady next to me reaches up and presses her button. The attendant walked over to see if the woman was okay, and the woman began to yell at the attendant for the rough flight, and that she'd been flying her whole life and clearly the pilot has no idea what he's doing. The stewardess just walked away. Once got stranded at Newark for 22 hours after our flight had an unfixable fault and was cancelled late at night. We got put up in a hotel, but understandably by the time the new flight rolled around, earliest they could fit in a new flight, everyone was quite tired and agitated. As we were waiting to board the new flight, the flight attendant announces they would be boarding people with additional needs and families with young children first, followed by first class, then premium economy, etc. All the pretty standard stuff. Obviously, it can take a bit longer for people in wheelchairs to board, so it makes sense for them to go first. It's common on most airlines, I believe. Anyway, this business dude races to the front of the crowd and starts yelling at an attendant, saying it was already disgusting that he had lost a day due to their incompetence, and now he had to wait even longer despite being a first-class passenger and paying big bucks every year to fly with them. The worst part was he was looking at the others in the crowd to back him up. Like it was perfectly reasonable to scream at this woman who, like us, had also been stranded and most likely had had very little sleep and was doing her best to do her job in this difficult situation. But she was awesome. Without missing a beat, she smiled and nodded and said, "Okay, sir," then made a big point of leaning into her mic and telling the waiting line of people in wheelchairs and mothers with babies that this gentleman needed to board before them and could they please wait. Literally every single person at the gate is looking at this guy with disgust on his face as he tries to backtrack and says he doesn't mind waiting for the first group, but the attendant says, No, you've made yourself quite clear, let's get you boarded and the others will have to wait. He's humiliated as he sheepishly walks by. She handled it perfectly. Frick yes, stewardess, frick yes. In what universe do you think I'm the good guy for saying this kind of thing? Also, this is not going to get him into the destination any quicker. The only thing he's speeding up is the transition between his airport chair and the chair on the plane. Not one specific passenger, but a type of behavior I've unfortunately seen too much of. A couple will book separate seats, the man in premium economy seat with extra legroom, and the woman in a normal economy seat. The woman will then play the sad sack and ask another passenger to give up their comfy seat so they can sit together. If the other passenger refuses, usually because they paid extra and don't fit a regular seat, some will even complain to the crew to make them move the other passenger. All of this to save a few bucks on the second premium seat. Seeing as a lot of people asked, no, crew don't move passengers because they're sitting next to someone else's spouse, and certainly not from a premium economy seat. This drives me insane. I once had a man get very heated because he was on the plane with his wife and 4 children and did not pre-select seats. And he wanted me to switch my window seat for a middle seat in a different row so his family could all be together. But I paid extra to pre-select my window seat. It was only like $15, but why should I have to give up what I paid for just because you wanted to save money and assumed others would rearrange themselves for you and your family? The flight attendant sided with me and the 6'4" guy who was in the aisle seat of my row, who also didn't want to move and was much more assertive than me, and the family was spread throughout the cabin. Mid-90s, there was this kid in customs, Toronto to Houston flight, who was going nuts. He was driving people crazy in the departure area. On the flight, he had a full-sized metal Tonka truck that he was running up and down the aisle with. He smacked me on the head and nearly hit my mum in front of me. I grabbed it before he could hit my very frail and on blood thinners mum and gave it to a crew member who refused to give it back to the family. The family refused to seat him until it was announced that there would be no food or beverage service until the aisle was cleared. Another woman grabbed the kid and returned him to his family. They let him run loose again as soon as the service was over. Finally, someone from the cockpit had to come back and tell the family we couldn't start the landing approach until the brat was in his seat. They put him in his seat, screaming bloody murder the whole time. As soon as descent started, they let him up and he was running up and down the aisle as we landed. The family was so dense that when the captain ordered everyone to stay in their damn seats and that only families with small children would be allowed to deplane first, they smirked their way down the aisle. My mum walked with a cane and the crush getting off was hard for her. Since we were home, we just waited till the aisles were clear. When we got off, you could hear the kids screaming halfway down the jetway. A police officer was holding him and the rest of the family, I'm guessing mum, dad, and 2 grandparents, were all in handcuffs. I once watched a very well-dressed businessman have an epic toddler-level tantrum at a check-in counter when he was advised that his flight was delayed due to fog. He literally screamed and jumped up and down and demanded that the airline better do something about it or else. The guy working behind the counter just smirked and suggested that the business guy was welcome to go outside and try to flap the fog away with his arms. The entire queue burst out laughing. I was on a plane at the Burbank airport and a family that was on standby boarded the plane without being told that they'd be on the flight. They proceeded to go passenger to passenger trying to get people to deboard the plane so they can use their standby tickets. They argued with the flight attendants. It was at least 45 minutes of us sitting on a plane on a runway, listening to this family of buttholes argue about how they need to be on this flight because they have somewhere to go. I was on my way home from Vegas and was hungover, and I don't think I've ever wanted to punch someone more than I did in that moment. A few years back, I had a 7-hour flight and a kid was sitting behind me who kept kicking the seat. I decided to just wait, maybe he'll eventually stop. Nope. It went on for about an hour until I couldn't take it anymore. 10 years of my regular flying, and this was the first time I called and complained to an air hostess. She apologized to me and asked the family behind me to keep it down. They just stared at her and did nothing. The moment she turned away, the little craphead started kicking against me again, and I couldn't take it anymore and turned back and said loudly to the family, "Could you please make him stop doing that?" The father, I presume, said sorry and still did nothing. The kid kept on, so finally I called the flight attendant and asked her if there was any other seat available because they're not listening or have no common decency, pointing to the family behind me. She came back after a few minutes and proceeded to take me to the first class. My first experience in the luxury section. The worst thing was she kept apologizing to me and I kept asking her to stop and that it wasn't her fault. It was just weird. Also, F those butthole families. I'm not sure this would happen these days. I feel like airlines have got tighter about letting people just move into the champagne and caviar zone. Please, if you have any modern-day accounts of this happening, share them in the comments below. I was a kid flying out to Utah to start my teen tour. About halfway through the flight, departing out of New York, the captain got on the speaker to announce an engine had failed and we needed to make an emergency landing in Chicago. Needless to say, we got a little concerned. Except for one passenger who stormed up to the flight attendant and explained she was a nanny and needed to get to Utah to attend to the children she took care of. I'm not exactly sure what she was hoping for, that the pilot, upon hearing a babysitter was on board, would risk the lives of everyone else to fly us all through, or that the flight attendant would be so moved by this story that she would climb out on the wing and repair the engine mid-flight. Alas, there was no emergency jetpack to give this passenger to blast away from the plane to get to Utah on time, and she was told to sit down. Was on a Vegas to Boston flight when a passenger passed away in his sleep. The whole situation was heartbreaking and the flight attendants were clearly shaken. We stopped in New York for emergency personnel to attend to him. The whole process was very quick and the pilot and staff handled it like champs. Just as we were about to take off, the guy in the front row asks the attendant if we'd all get free drinks due to the inconvenience. I've never wanted to yell at a stranger so much in my life. The next day I got an email from the airline with a $50 voucher to apologize. I didn't want it nor expect it and wondered if it happened because some idiot complained about the diversion. I did tweet the airline to compliment the staff on their handling of the situation. They deserved it. I didn't say what the situation was, just the flight number. I figured they'd figure it out. Flight attendant: "Can you please open your blind all the way? It's regulation for landing." Passenger: "No, I want it closed." This goes on for a minute. Passenger is using his tone to assert that he refuses to open it. Flight attendant speed walks to the handset and her voice comes on over the PA. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to play some trivia today. The question is, why do we keep the blinds open during takeoff and landing? And without letting anyone answer, she jumps right into, it's so that we can all keep an eye on the outside of the plane for safety. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I fly a lot, and I was on one of those planes where half the plane were ignoring the rules and stuff. When we touched down, these people immediately got up, walking around and taking their bags out of the overheads. Mind you, the plane hasn't parked. It's literally just touched the ground on the landing strip, so it's still moving, and it's dangerous for half the people on the plane to be messing around. And even worse, taking all their heavy bags down around everyone else's heads. The flight attendants are now desperately trying to get these people to sit down until the plane stops moving, and some people were waving their hands at them dismissively. I think the captain heard the commotion and the flight attendant half yelling, because all of a sudden the plane did a very abrupt stop, which knocked over all the people standing up and then continued on its way to park. The flight attendant then said, "This is exactly why we have rules." Yeah, all those people stood up and looked real sheepish. I remember being an unruly little kid who wouldn't put my seatbelt on in the car, so my mother would just slam on the brakes, making my face hit the seat, and this is exactly how I imagine the situation you just described. I had someone have a meltdown because I had to have them properly stow their wedding dress. The thing was massive and spilling into the aisle, blocking seats of the entire row. They may have had to pay the hotel to get the wrinkles out, but I likely saved them from shoe prints and beverage cart rollers going back and forth over it. Still, she was in tears and I was not going to risk others' safety, including my own. My future sister-in-law brought a ticket for her dress to fly in a seat for her wedding. She of course went through the correct steps to do this, called the airline to see if she could even do that, got a gate pass for it, had to go through the metal and body line for TSA and it counted as her carry-on. Had to pick up a special boarding pass, early boarding, and it got the window seat so no one could trip over it in an emergency. If Southwest had said no, she couldn't do it, then she would have just driven her dress, but everyone was super accommodating and even gave all of us a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We did share the bottles with another wedding party that was flying out who didn't get the special treatment. My mum was a flight attendant in her 20s. I asked her for a story. Her first week flying, there was a group of drunk men on the flight. At one point, when returning to quiet them down again, one of the fellows had his Johnson out on full display for all, in its flaccid glory. She says to him very politely and a bit taken aback, "Why don't you put that away now?" And this drunken man flat out says to her, "Why don't you put it away for me?" with the most revolting smug smile on his face. My mum says, in her exact words, "I'd be happy to do that for you, but you'd never be able to use it again." My mum has always had the most ridiculous stories that always turn out to be true, and I'll take her word for this one. Threatening castration on a paying customer is in this case completely justified. If they're exposing themselves on a plane, I feel, let's get that written up in all the airplane's handbooks. I was on a flight from New York City to Portland International Airport. Only empty seat was next to me, a middle seat. Bulkhead, but the kind where there isn't a wall, just the first-class seats in front of us. Door is about to close when a large, sweaty man comes running into the plane to claim the empty seat. He was carrying a full-size pizza box. All the overhead bins were already closed and full, but that didn't stop him proceeding to open them to find a place to stash his pizza. The stewardess kindly informed him that he couldn't put his pizza in an overhead bin. "But it'll get stepped on," he gruffly informs her. She proceeded to tell him to take his seat and put the pizza in front of him. He told her that he flies with pizza all the time and has never been treated this way. He persisted, but as their argument was getting pretty heated, he finally succumbed and put the pizza under the seat in front of him and sat down. The stewardesses have now started the safety, video, and demonstration, and he pulls out a flip phone and proceeds to make a call. I can tell he's going through menus, so I'm thinking he's calling Delta to complain. Nope, turns out to be his landline phone company. He had been late paying his bill and was trying to get them to waive the late fee. They wouldn't. He's arguing with them. Plane has pushed back from the gate and is headed toward the runway at this point. Stewardess comes over and tells him he needs to put his phone away now. He motions with his hand to say 1 minute. "No sir, it needs to be put away now." He flips it shut dramatically mid-sentence and puts it in his pocket. Stewardess is back at the front of the plane. He then decides to stretch. I'm pretty much plastered to the wall as he tries to stay out of his way as he extends his arms up and then to the side, etc., and then twists in his seat back and forth, clearly agitated. He then extends his arms up, stretches out his fingers, and proceeds to crack his knuckles very expressively, one at a time, sort of like a primary school bully would do on the playground before they were going to kick your butt. In that whole knuckle-cracking process, he flips a middle finger toward the flight attendant. I didn't notice her reaction as I was just waiting to get the 6-hour flight underway and over with. Next thing I know, I can tell we're pulling back to the gate. Flight attendants prepare for arrival and cross-check. Message. Door opens, cockpit door opens, captain comes to our row. Sir, I understand you are harassing my flight attendant. I need you to leave the plane now. The pizza man attempted to argue and even ask me and other neighboring passengers if we had witnessed anything. Clearly the pilot wasn't budging on his decision, so the guy got his pizza off the floor and left the plane. Door closed and we departed. Empty seat next to me. A dozen years ago, I flew from Chicago to Israel. Very long flight with a stop in the middle, with a woman who didn't seem to understand that everyone around her was in the same situation she was in. She dropped a number of passive-aggressive gems over the course of our day together, but the worst one was right when we were being seated for the first leg. The plane was one of those 3-seat, 5-seat, 3-seat setups with aisles on each side of the 5-seat section, and this woman was seated in the middle of the 5-seat section. But you can't seat me in the middle. What if I need to get up and walk around and the people next to me are asleep? I'll be very uncomfortable for this the whole flight. Wow, lady, you figured out why flying kind of sucks all by yourself. Now sit down and start pretending you're not here like the rest of us. Currently a flight attendant flying 5 years for a legacy carrier. I have a few that pop into my head. One was that I was working a quick turn at the end of a 3-dayer, and we had a medical emergency in first class where a passenger passed out. We had to give him CPR and hook him up on an AED. So 2 of us were with the man and the other flight attendant was paging a doctor and communicating with the captain. While this was going on, a passenger in the first row of the main cabin, who can clearly see everything going on, kept paging for a Coke and getting very upset that we wouldn't serve him. Finally, a commuting flight attendant stepped in for us and had a word with him. Another one was actually my last trip, when a woman who boarded towards the end, sitting in row 10A, who left her bag in the aisle blocking everyone else trying to get on, because she was looking for a place for her bag. She found a spot towards the back, and put her hand in the air and started snapping and hollering at me to get her bag for her. I went up to her and told her to get her bag out of the aisle. She got in my face and demanded that I needed to put it up, to which I answered that I couldn't lift her bag for her and she threw a fit. Finally, a nice gentleman helped her. Anyway, after boarding, she accused me of stealing her first scarf. I didn't. Then she called me a blonde B-word. She was removed. I had a lady another time get mad at me because I wouldn't give her my personal food I brought from home and paid for with my own money. She said she was hungry and she needed it. Nope. Another flight, I had a man and his small kid on a flight, and he, during boarding, asked me for one of the first-class meals I was preparing, and I asked him where he was sitting. Once he said a row in main cabin, I told him, I'm sorry, these are for first class, but we have food for purchase in main cabin. He then told me his kid was hungry and demanded we give him free food. I kept saying, I'm sorry, but the food is for purchase. He didn't think it was fair that he had to pay for food because he had a hungry kid. The seat switch scam has happened to me more times than it should have. I'm a college student and thus naturally people, especially couples with babies, think it would be much easier to force me into switching. There was this one time I was on a really long flight from Chicago to India. I usually never haggle much about a seat and I'm pretty cool about switching if people ask me for it. I have this crappy quality of trying to avoid conflict in any way possible. This time I was fortunate enough to get one of those front seats with a lot of legroom. I knew this seemed too good to be true, and at any moment a couple with a baby would request for the seat, to which I will cave. Needless to say, minutes later, this couple came up to me, with the flight attendant, asking me to switch because they had a baby, and the father was sitting next to me. The mother had a middle seat way back in the plane for a very long flight. Although I was hesitant, but with 3 people awkwardly waiting on me to say yes, I eventually caved. As I was moving my stuff, one of my small empty plastic bottles fell from my bag and nearly hit the father. Now, you have to understand that this was one of those light plastic water bottles that could barely hurt if you tried to hit someone with it, let alone when it falls from the bag. But for some reason, that angered the father into believing that it could have somehow seriously injured their baby. Even after apologizing to him for a solid minute, he kept shouting at me about how careless I was and that I needed to learn plane etiquette. That just did it for me. I told him that I was no longer comfortable with the switch and just went back to my seat and pretended super hard to fall asleep. The entire flight, he did his best to try to annoy me, fighting me on the handrest, making it hard for me to move around, etc., but I never felt so good about my plane etiquette. Currently on an airplane and saw a man berate the flight attendant because they let employees of the airline board before the customers. He was so angry because he paid for business select. They didn't pay for crap, so why are they boarding before me? The flight attendant responded with its company policy, many are actually working and just need to get to the airport they'll be leaving from. And there's also only 3 on the flight, so what's the big deal anyway? He continued to whine and complain to her for another 10 minutes or so. All because now there were only 140 seats to choose from instead of 143. Boo-hoo. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.